People always ask me how it felt in the moment I realized everything was over. They want the flash, the slam of truth, the cinematic collapse. The reality was quieter. The truth arrived like a cold, polite knock at the wrong hour, and I opened the door half asleep and let it step inside. My name is Aaron. Back then I was 27, working odd shifts, writing code for a startup that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. I'd moved into the apartment because it made sense. Month-to-month lease. Small building, hardwood floors that complained when you walked across them. The kind of place you take because you're young and practical and in a hurry to get to the next thing. My girlfriend, Naomi, moved in with me 6 months after we started dating. It felt natural. She brought boxes of cheap art prints, mismatched mugs, a spider plant that refused to die, and the kind of laugh that made strangers look up. We were good at the ordinary stuff. We argued about which way to hang a towel. We forgot to water plants. We shared playlists and grocery lists, and the remote. She worked at a marketing firm with windows that looked expensive, and I geeked out over obscure movies. Friends said we fit. Hell, sometimes I thought we were proof that people could find the easy, steady kind of love that made sense. Not the wild, soul-shattering type. Just the kind that folds laundry together and borrows sugar and remembers your tea order. But even the most ordinary things gather edges after a while. Naomi and I hit the kind of rut that doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It creeps in slow, a postponement here, a skipped dinner there, the way her eyes would drift to the phone when it buzzed on the counter. We became a couple of quick apologies and deferred conversations. We tried to call it growing pain. I told myself work stress, deadlines, and she said she was tired. We both nodded and pretended the quiet between us was ordinary, like a neutral room in a house you've lived in for years. That changed when she told me she was going to visit her sister for a week. She made it sound spontaneous and small, like a necessary escape from her own head. 600 kilometers away, which meant driving across states and sleeping on a couch and festivals of family noise. She kissed me at the door, promised to text me photos, and called me on her way to the station. She left with one overnight bag and a promise that felt like a paper band, thin and easy to tear. A few days later, I was killing time cleaning up some receipts when my phone lit up with a photo from an unknown number. The image blurred at first. Late afternoon sun, a city patio with an umbrella, a woman's laugh halfway between grin and smirk. I looked twice. Naomi, side by side with someone who wasn't me. Familiar shoulders, the angle of his jaw like a memory. I zoomed in until pixels made faces, until the laugh lines were sharp. He looked like an ex. He looked like a prequel. He looked like the kind of man who belonged in the past. My hands got cold. I took the photo and stared at it until the edges went soft. She had said she was with family. She was 600 kilometers away. The lighting and the angle suggested otherwise. I did the thing people do when their chest tightens and their brain refuses to accept the obvious. I called a friend and made light of it, but my voice trembled even through the laughter. Then I called Naomi. She answered like someone stealing a second of normal life from the edge of something dangerous. "Hey," she said like a greeting and a shield. "Hey," I said airless. "How's your sister?" "Oh my God, you should see the little kids," she said, breathless in the way she always sounded when she was enjoying herself. "We're at a patio place with this fantastic lemon tart. I'll send you a picture." She sent a picture, and for a second, the room flattered me with its ordinary glow. Then I compared that photo to the one that had come from the unknown number, and the laughter in her mouth didn't match the tired curve of my girl's smile. You want the raw moment? It was a microsecond of calculus in my head. The images, the timeline, the math of where bodies can and cannot be. I felt the scene fold. The apartment, the plant, the mismatched mugs. It all folded down into a single point of impossible weight. The next breath I took tasted like iron. I did something stupid. I took my camera phone and left the apartment. I wanted distance, not to run, but to vanish for a few minutes with the idea of what I'd seen. I walked the city until my feet hurt, replaying the photo like a film on a loop. My anger wasn't a molten thing at first. It was more like cold water in my chest, precise and purposeful. Then the thought came and sat there like a small bright stone. I could take a picture of her with him. If she was lying, it'd be proof. If she was innocent, it could break me softly. Either way, I needed truth. 2 days later, I saw them, or rather I saw him, from across the street, leaning back against the restaurant wall like he owned the sun. Naomi was beside him, hair loose, laughing in a way I recognized only from before. They didn't look like casual friends on a catch-up. They looked intimate. I lined up the shot with the practiced calm of someone who has learned not to scream in public. The shutter clicked. The image was quiet, sharp and final. I went home and sat on the couch like a man who had been given one simple foreign currency. Proof. It felt heavy. It felt valuable. I didn't call her. I made tea and asked myself what size of coward I was, because I didn't storm the restaurant. I didn't hurl accusations in the street. I just sat and let the photo be the verdict. There are two ways a person can react to being betrayed: combust or calculate. I have always preferred calculations. They're colder, but they hurt less when you do them right. Here's where people think jailbreaks are cinematic. They imagine cries, open confrontations, the slamming of doors. That's what movies do. Real life, when you're trying to salvage dignity and not become something you'll later regret, is about tiny, intentional cruelty to your own impulses. I drank coffee every morning like nothing had changed. I asked her about her trip. I let the photos simmer in my phone. Naomi came back a week later smelling of someone else's perfume like a window open to a different house. She walked in with a suitcase and stories about the lemon tart and her sister's dog, and she kissed me like nothing unusual had happened. "How was it?" I asked, putting out my hands like a man offering a plate. "It was great," she said. "So great. You should have come." Her eyes flicked for a heartbeat and landed on the coffee table where I'd left the phone, face down. My thumb itched. I kept it there like it was a grenade, knowing if I flipped it over, the room would change. We went through that week like two people agreeing to ignore a crack in the wall. She seemed uncertain and overly affectionate, as if she were trying to sew a closing seam with apology thread, but she never offered the obvious confession. I didn't force it, not then. I'd lived too many headlines to know that a confrontation can be a performance that rewinds trust without actually returning it. There's a legal thing about my lease that changed the game. I had a month-to-month agreement. The building's policy required 60 days notice before vacating. Naomi wasn't on the lease. That last fact was important. Not because I wanted her to be homeless. I didn't. But because leases and signatures are a kind of currency a person can spend on safety. They're proof that someone belongs someplace. With that proof came leverage. And leverage is a thin, useful knife in the hand of a man who wants dignity intact. I found the new place the week after she returned. It was tiny, a box of light, but my name would be on the lease alone. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming ground. I gave the required notice without dramatics. I told my landlord, a patient man named Greg, that I'd be moving in 60 days. I didn't tell anyone else the real reason I was leaving. You don't read everything aloud. The landlord was kind and deferred, the way good landlords in good stories do. He mowed his lawns and ignored the personality conflicts of his tenants, because that's what landlords are paid to do. Tolerate things until they don't have to. I began to rearrange my mornings in small ways. I slept in the spare room sometimes. I refrained from hugs that lingered too long. I stopped sharing passwords and held back the easy confessions that had been the scaffolding of our relationship. Where Naomi would have tried to close the distance with sex, I created a polite absence. I suggested couples therapy in a tone that was professional and hollow, as if it were a calendar appointment she could accept or decline. She said yes with surprising sweetness. I meant it as a line, a polite way to signal that I was making moves to keep my feet on solid ground. She agreed, but the appointment became a place where she spoke in circles and I kept files. It is curious how ordinary cruelty can feel like fate when delivered slowly. I didn't lock the bedroom. I didn't hide the keys. I just designed my life to be the kind that couldn't be easily shared anymore. I spent evenings on the couch with my laptop, pretending to work, while I quietly messaged the moving companies. I didn't bray my triumph or my pain to friends. I told a few trusted ones that I was taking some time, and that was all the truth they received. This is the part people find cold. I arranged a moving team for an early morning. I paid for it myself. I called Greg and asked him if he could keep one of his maintenance men on standby for a day in case logistics were tight. I asked him, with surprising humility, if he could help by being present as an impartial witness. I didn't say why. I just said logistics. He agreed. His voice was flat and unintrigued. He wasn't a villain. He was a kind man who liked things clean. His indifference became the sleeve I hid behind. We all love a story where lightning strikes and the guilty run screaming. My story prefers the slow lurch of planning, the way a careful watchmaker replaces one tiny gear at a time. I set the date 2 days after the last day. Naomi had said she needed to return to a friend's place for a week. I timed it so that the building would need the apartment tidied for new tenants. I didn't engineer cruelty. I engineered consequence. In the weeks leading up to the move, I acted like a man uncertain, like a man who missed his girlfriend, but was too proud to beg. I suggested the therapy sessions, sat distant at dinner and let her attempt what felt like clumsy repairs of a pattern I'd stopped wanting to repair. People saw me as sad and waiting. Only a few knew I was calm. I smiled at the absurdity of how easy it was to slide from heartbreak to strategy when you protected the thing you loved, your dignity. Rumors weave nets in small circles. I knew some people in our group would help if they understood, and I knew others would judge me as cruel. I accepted that. I thought of revenge a bit like a math problem, where every variable is carefully accounted for, so no one gets hurt more than necessary, except the one who had chosen betrayal. Early morning on the day was cold enough that breath hung in small ghosts when you exhaled. I woke before the alarm with the mechanical calm of someone who has rehearsed far more than his body wanted to. The movers were scheduled for 7. The new tenants were due to walk through in 48 hours. I told Naomi I had a work meeting and would be out much of the day. She kissed me a little too quickly on the cheek, hair fluffed like a woman trying on a lighter version of herself. I watched her at the door, suitcase in hand, and felt a softness that no revenge could unsew. I opened the door and let the chill in. The first truck arrived before sunrise. Guys in hoodies and reflective vests, yawning and practical. They carried boxes and blank faces, and the confidence of men accustomed to other people's lives. I had them start on the furniture, couches, shelving, the mattress. My heart wasn't thudding the way people imagine when they do something drastic. It was numb and steady as a metronome. That steadiness came from the work I had done on myself beforehand. I had rehearsed my lines. I'm moving out. Arrangements were made. Please be professional. I had rehearsed my calm. At 9, Naomi came home unexpectedly. She said she'd changed her mind about staying another night with a friend. I guessed she'd wanted to retrieve something she had left, or perhaps to confront me. Instead, she found men moving like strangers across the rooms that had contained our years. She froze at the threshold. Her face shifted through an ugly spectrum. Confusion, embarrassment, then a fragile smile. "I didn't think you were going to be this early," she said, with a pitch like someone attempting to reweave a suddenly unstable cloth. "We had an early crew," I said slowly. "They were efficient. I wanted to honor the new tenants by getting a head start." I kept my voice soft. I had learned to make softness an unassailable armor. She walked in as if walking onto someone else's stage, small items tucked under her arm. The spider plant sat in a box, half unwrapped. The movers worked like a gentle circus, transferring what had been mine to crates and straps. Naomi drifted between them like a ghost of the life she had once belonged to, lips raw with words she did not yet know how to say. She looked at me, eyes rimmed in a soft red. I could not tell if it was from travel or from something else. "Why?" she said. Not accusing, tiny. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because you lied," I wanted to say. "Because you spent a week at a patio with someone else and called it a family trip. Because you thought you could hold both and nobody would notice. Because the warmth I used to carry for you had cooled to the factual cold of paperwork and logistics." I didn't say this. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo I had taken at the patio, the one that hung like a small black flag in my phone. The moment her eyes registered the image, I felt something break in the world like a small glass. She let out a sound that was not a word, a stumble between surprise and calculation. It was like she was walking through a fog of her own excuse. "It's not what it looks like," she said in the practiced way liars learn, the voice that smooths edges into lie-shaped lies. Her hands moved like a conductor, ignoring the tide of boxes around them. "It looks exactly like it does." I slid the phone across the table like a small, clear instrument of truth. The mover's hands stilled. The squeak of bubble wrap seemed louder than the traffic outside. Naomi stared at the image and then at me. I watched her count the minutes her brain was buying her. She opened her mouth and closed it. For a second, the apartment hung between two people's versions of life, and I wanted to taste the air. Then our landlord, Greg, who had texted earlier and simply asked when he should send the cleaner, pushed open the door and walked in like an ordinary man with an ordinary day. He glanced around, taking in the boxes, the concentrated looks on the mover. His expression folded into something like easy competence, a man who would rather measure a rug than mediate human disasters. He paused when he saw Naomi and the phone. "Everything okay?" he asked. She blinked at him, then at me. "He's moving out," she said, in a voice that was more explanation than statement. Greg raised an eyebrow. "I thought you both lived here," he said politely, because he had read the building's ledger. He stepped closer, the way a neutral judge leans into balance. I had rehearsed this too. I had planned it until the scenes folded into a tidy order. I had copies of the photos printed, because I wanted them to be physical, not secreted behind a screen. I handed a small stack to Greg and said, "I'm giving my notice. Naomi isn't on the lease." Greg read them and then looked at Naomi with the indifferent curiosity of a man who had seen this sort of social geometry before. "You have until midnight," he said, plain as a weather forecast. "We have new tenants moving in 2 days, and we need the unit clear. If you don't get your things out, the plan is to put them curbside, and they'll be considered abandoned." It was not cruelty that came out of him. It was legal fact, dry and incomprehensibly efficient. The words did not land like a gavel. They landed like a mechanical click, as if the apartment's life were a machine that had been instructed to stop. Naomi's face went the color of old paint, shock, then pleading, then rage all stacked themselves into quick succession. Her hands flew to her mouth. "You can't do that," she said, voice brittle. Her eyes flitted to me in a way I had seen when someone checks a mirror out of habit. She looked at the movers, and then at the door, and the world rearranged itself according to the new rules. Inside me there was no victory dance. There was only a very calm observation, The plan happened as planned. The movers packed her small life into boxes that were now anonymous. The spider plant, the mugs, the cheap art prints, the hairbrush with a few strands of her hair on it. They all began to have a new life outside my space. She moved through the room like a woman who had fallen into an unfamiliar movie, each scene more surreal than the last. The movers worked efficiently and with gentle hands, as if they were dealing with fragile things that belonged to someone else. She gathered what she could: a stack of folded clothes, a bag of toiletries, a small cardboard box filled with letters and postcards, and an old ridiculous mixtape. I watched her, and the photograph on the table looked like the letter that had written the last chapter of our ordinary life. When the last piece of furniture left, the apartment gaped back at me like a smile with the teeth missing. Naomi stood in the middle of the room with everything that was left in a pile at her feet, and for a moment she looked like a woman in an earthquake. "Please," she said, for the last time, the sound of the word raw, as if she had learned how to say it in a language where begging carried weight. "Aaron, please, don't do this." I swallowed. I had no words that would not sound vindictive. I had no words that would comfort. "You made your choices," I said, soft as I could. "I made mine." She started to gather things into the boxes the movers had left for the smaller stuff. I watched her fold clothing with methodical motions, as if she had timed these movements in other lives. When she left, she carried her life like a museum piece, shoulders squared with a dignity that might have been real or might have been a mask. I took one last picture before she shut the door, not because I wanted to gloat, but because the camera keeps history like a legend. She stood by the pile of boxes and the spider plant, the daytime leaking through the blinds across her face. The photo was not triumphal. It was documented. People ask if I felt guilty. They ask if I sobbed with revenge in my hands. The truth is a quieter story. After she left that day, the apartment felt like a throat that had been cleared of someone's voice. The rooms were empty in a different way. I made coffee and drank it in silence. I called a friend and left a brief message. "I'm okay." Later, our friend group talked about it like people dissect rare animals. Eyes bright, speculation in the margins. Some called me cold. Some called me brave. Friends who'd been on the sidelines texted variations of support and outrage. I offered a minimal reply: the photos, the timeline, the lease. When the new tenants arrived 2 days later, they walked in with the kind of eyes that see new places as blank slates. They thanked me for doing the legwork, and we shared awkward small talk about utility bills and internet providers. One of them asked if I needed help with anything I wanted to move into the new place. I declined with the careful politeness of a man who had just closed a chapter and didn't need to be consoled by strangers. The landlord cleaned the apartment and turned the key over like a judge handing a gavel to the next case. Naomi did not call me that night. She sent one text the next morning that read, "I'm sorry." I read it and felt something like a closed window. I wrote back simply, "Good luck." She replied with a pleading emoji and then silence. That silence felt like an answer neither of us could have changed. Friends called and asked if I regretted it. Alone, late that night, I looked at the photos again. The garden patio, the stacked boxes, Naomi's face when she finally understood. I expected the images to taste like ash, but they tasted like fact. Proof is a strange thing. It does not swallow sorrow. It does not create the script for the next life. It simply sets the scene for a different ending. Weeks turned into months. I settled into the new apartment and found that living alone felt like a practice in breathing. It meant having fewer stolen moments and more time to rebuild. I dated eventually. The first person I let in after everything was a friend who made me laugh in a way that didn't require explanations. Life moved, as it is obligated to do, forward. Inside the friend circle, my move became a legend of sorts. Some marveled at the coolness of my demeanor. Others criticized me for the lack of drama, for the way the truth was delivered like a legal document instead of a hurricane. A few people asked, in soft tones, whether the clean way I had done it had been cruel. My answer remained practical. Sometimes the cleanest revenge is the one that preserves your dignity. There is, of course, poetic justice in the small thing. Once, months later at a friend's birthday, Naomi came in with a new haircut and eyes that looked older. She smiled at me across the room with that half-remembered ease, but did not approach. I saw in her the echo of the woman who had sat on my couch and borrowed my warmth. I felt no pleasure in her faltering steps and did not offer a hand. I nodded politely like two strangers who had once been roommates of memory. The room hummed with music and cheap wine. It was enough. My quiet satisfaction was not about punishment. It was about the restoration of something you don't spell out. The sense that you are allowed to choose who you let live inside your life, and that you are allowed to act when someone chooses differently. The revenge that mattered was not spectacle. It was the simple return of agency. I left with my name on a new lease, and my dignity intact. Years later, the story reads like a parable in some texts. People retell it with different flavors depending on how the teller feels about justice. Some add lines I never said. Some attribute speeches to me I never gave. That's how legends are made, by polishing the uncomfortable edges until the story sings. What the legend misses is always the same: the quiet moments between the beats, the waiting room of a plan, the coffee before dawn, the slow closing of a door. This, I think, is the essential cruelty of any relationship. It can end with fireworks, or it can end with a practical and whispered turning away. Both hurt, both heal. I chose the latter because I did not want my grief to become a theater where everyone else could watch my collapse. A final detail, because friends always want a flourish. At a barbecue a year later, Greg the landlord told the story as if it were an anecdote. He said I had handled it like a man who'd run out of unnecessary drama and had chosen to inventory life instead. He laughed and nodded, and I laughed with him, a sound that had weight but no sharp edges. Sometimes the best revenge is a life lived forward, one that doesn't need to shout to be heard. If you want a moral, here it is. Truth, when wielded with care and timing, can be kinder than rage. It will not always feel righteous. It will sometimes feel like math, but it will give you back something dearer than satisfaction. It will give you your own name again.